Okay, well, this is Citrix's sponsored panel. This is their sponsored session, but I'm up here, and I'm not from Citrix, and most of the rest of us up here aren't from Citrix because they decided to just have a bunch of people talk about stuff instead of talking about their own products. So how cool is that?
Right.
But they did give us the title for the session, Are IT Admins the New Rap Stars? A discussion on enterprise mobility trends transcending MDM, including the future of mobile application management and corporate app stores. They also won the award for the longest session title here at BriForum this week. But again, since Kurt, you're the Citrix representative up here and in the room right now, thanks so much for having us.
Thank you.
So I'm going to introduce, we'll all introduce ourselves in just a minute. But today's format, so this is going to be a, now 70-minute panel session talking about issues in enterprise mobility management today. But what I wanted to do is make sure that we had, there are a lot of different topics to cover in enterprise mobility management, and since it's so much of what we're doing is so new, Citrix has had these EMM products for just about like 14 months now, and so there are a lot of new technologies and new topic areas that I want to be sure that we don't leave anything out, because there are a lot of things to talk about. So we're sort of going to organize a discussion in 12 different sections today. And as well, we have people representing five different perspectives on all of these different mobility topics. So why don't you guys just introduce yourself? I have you in order on slides. That's a different order than you're sitting. But first, I have Kurt Romer representing the vendor angle.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kurt Romer, Chief Security Strategist with Citrix and a member of our CTO office. I'm responsible for all future state security, compliance, and privacy across Citrix.
And then next we have Sean Bass.
Hello, I'm Sean. I'm a consultant based in the Chicago area, and I've been working with Citrix products for, 15 years-ish, 20 years, something like that. I'm old now. Okay, my memory's going. I'm almost 40 now.
And then next we have Jim Lebersky.
Hello, my name is Jim Lebersky. I'm with a company based in Minneapolis, Minnesota called Barrier One. And we've developed a real-time intelligence security appliance of a variety of different sizes. So we inspect, analyze all 7 layers in real time and react within microseconds.
Right, and then next, representing the end user, we have Teresa Miller.
So I'm Teresa Miller. I work with Children's Hospital of Wisconsin, therefore from Wisconsin. We use a lot of Citrix Zen app. We're rolling into Zen Desktop, and we're exploring a lot of the mobility options to secure our bring your own devices to work.
Okay, and I'm Jack Madden. I blog at brianmadden.com. I just wrote this book, Enterprise Mobility Management, that you guys have hopefully seen, and I'll be representing the opinionated blogger angle. And so next I want to go through so that you know which direction we're going. So our 12 topic areas that we'll be covering through. So why enterprise mobility management, BYOD, dealing with end users, device level management, that would be device level management versus app level management, iOS 7, very exciting, dealing with mobile email, dealing with this concept that we call dual persona, or separate, having work stuff live on and commingling on the same device as personal stuff, going beyond email to other applications, building up application ecosystems of manageable applications, specialized devices that'd be like, like a virtualized phone or a Samsung Knox device or something like that. Mobile information management, topic that comes up a lot, and then the future. So with that, we can dive right in. So the first question for everybody is why is enterprise mobility management so important? Why are we talking about this? And for those of us that might not be so sure, that have been, this is a desktop virtualization conference. We've been dealing with Windows, VDI, RDSH, everything for years. Why do we need to be caring about all this new MDM, MAM stuff?
I guess, I'll begin that and really say, how many of you have a smartphone or a tablet with you? I would assume pretty much everybody in the room, right? How many of you needed IT to help you decide on which phone to get, to procure that phone, to set it up, to configure it, to maintain it? Yeah, one hand. Very good. That's the real crux of the issue. So we have a lot of people who have been out there just selecting their own technologies, basically bypassing IT. And they're still using a lot of enterprise data, especially things like email and some enterprise applications and spreadsheets and Word docs and everything else. It leads to what I like to call the quadruple bypass of IT. You've got a BYO user on a consumer-grade device using sensitive enterprise data and going directly to the cloud. And by doing that, they have bypassed IT in every way. And because they're using sensitive enterprise data, they're potentially putting the company at risk. This is the problem that we've got to get our hands around.
Let's hear from the customer angle, Jim. So why this is happening? Can't you just make a policy to deal with it or something, and then you can just make a policy. You don't have to buy stuff.
Well, I think the policy is usually the first step in all of this, is to craft a policy to either have a part of the selection process and some parameters around authentication and a few other things, and maybe some user behavioral pieces that are acceptable in your own corporate culture. But beyond that, with today's things that happen very quickly, what used to take months to, from a tax standpoint or breach standpoint, now takes minutes. So everything's compressed. So I think this first step is a good step. I think you're starting to witness some of the new identities and pieces to bring down some of the safeguards for every endpoint in a number of different ways. And I think you'll see that escalate over time.
So then, as a customer in a company, so then that means that some sort of mobility management or some sort of flavor of what we're talking about today becomes important then.
It's going to be integrated, and this whole concept is now, like it has in the enterprise, is working itself right in, so it blends right in to networking or the connectivity from point A to point B, and it'll be seamless.
Jack, we had a question already.
Yeah.
Why should we allow personal devices on our enterprise network?
Because it's going to happen no matter what.
Why? I mean, we're the ones giving the access to the information. Why would we do that?
So here's the general problem, and the reason why I think EMM exists today. EMM exists because it's a typical IT knee-jerk reaction to the fact that they think they can control the information. The fact of the reality is you can't control the information. Mm-hmm. No matter what you think you can do in terms of analyzing traffic, doing DLP, no matter what you do, people will always find a way to exfiltrate information if they want to get it out. The question is, how many barriers do you put in place to try to prevent them from doing things, and how much does what you're doing actually prevent them from getting legitimate work done? Now, there are people out there that you can say, oh, you're just playing, you don't really need to have this data in different places, and you are putting us at risk, and that may be true. There are other people that legitimately, if they had that mobility capability, they can be more productive. They can do work on off-peak hours. They can do things. And you could argue like, well, we have a VPN, you can remote your machine, that kind of stuff. But if it takes the person 5 minutes to turn their PC on, get a VPN going, connect into a system, do all these different things, they lost 5 minutes when they might have needed to just pull a quick figure up to hand it to a customer or something like that. So, but again, I think the whole EMM angle was IT saying, we've always managed the network, we've always managed the PCs, we've always managed everything, and therefore EMM is the next evolution of, we need to manage the mobile devices. But it is sort of an illusion that IT thinks they can actually control the information. They can't.
Yeah, and it's interesting, if you take a look at it, why are we in this boat? People went out and spent their own money on their own phones, on their own data plans, and they put all this technology in their pockets so that they could be more productive, so that they could work from anywhere, so that they don't have to be tethered to the office all the time. We should be thrilled about that. We should just find a way to be able to do this with appropriate levels of security for the organization so that we're not compromising everything. But instead of going back to the old IT paradigm of, oh my God, something bad happened, let's lock everything down, why don't we instead step back and say, you know, what risks can we accept to get this greater productivity and to have people be a little happier? And what are some of the things that we need to help people with instead of what should we shut them down on? Think that first, and you'll arrive at some of the right policies that people will actually use. Otherwise, the policies are just going to be like every other IT policy. There's a few people in IT that read them, and nobody else cares. They'll just find a way around it.
And to their points, from the user perspective, I have a device that I prefer, and I may want to bring that to work. And today, like, I'm limited to just being able to use my email and then maybe Citrix Receiver to get into some of my applications. And like Sean was saying, that takes time. It might take me 5 minutes to get into that system, when it would be wonderful to just click and be in. I think it would make, it makes the users more productive.
I think that, to everybody's point, what drives is productivity, and it's not going away, as already stated. So let's embrace it.
Well said. Let's move on to another point. So, you know, bring your own device. So many mobility management vendors are marketing on BYOD, but I've been saying for quite a while, you know, while these devices 5 and 6 years ago, predominantly, yes, they may have all been personal devices that we're bringing in, and you have to maybe respect some lines there. Today, is it really such a big deal? I mean, for HR people, it may be a big deal, but for us IT folks in the room, is it that much of a big deal who owns the device? Because the iPhone that my company bought me is the exact same iPhone as the company that I brought in and paid for with my own money. So I'm going to have the exact same set of expectations and usage patterns no matter who paid for it. And because I have the same set of expectations and user patterns, that represents, no matter who bought the device, the same set of challenges for the vendor and for IT. So can we like leave the intense BYOD debate to the HR conference?
I think it depends. I think there's two challenges. You know, the HR aspects of it, and who has ownership, who's responsible for pairing, who's responsible for supporting. That's one aspect of it. If you're concerned about IT risk and liability and these kinds of things, I think the traditional reason why BYOD poses a challenge for customers is most enterprise IT shops don't have the notion of having insecure, guest networks that people can freely come out with their personal devices and that kind of stuff. You're just starting to see more organizations adopt the fact that they've got a guest network, and that if someone wants to bring in a home device, they can use the guest network. But the age-old problem is you've got your corporate LAN, and you don't want a personal device in the corporate LAN. And even organizations that say we've got a policy that strictly forbids it, people still do it. If they know the proxy server name, they can pop it and they can do these kinds of things. And then that creates an IT liability and risk that you have to be willing to deal with. So if customers...
How is that personal iPhone inherently more risky than the...
Because it may not have the exact same security controls that the corporate managed device has. That's the general issue.
I don't know. I think that it goes a little deeper than that. You know, IT for years has assumed that they had full control over the infrastructure and full control over the data, when really they were just data custodians handling a lot of other people's data and didn't really know what the sensitivity of that data was. And because of that, we had to kind of protect everything equally. So you had lockdown networks, lockdown workstations, data centers, all kinds of other things. And then the model slowly eroded over time, and now all of a sudden with BYO, everybody's going, oh my God, this is awful. We don't know where our sensitive data is. We have no control over anything. When in reality, we really have been eroding that control over the last couple decades. Just didn't know it, didn't have it hit us upside the forehead. Now it did with BYO. So really, if you design for that loss of control and you design for BYOD, you're not only solving the problem with people walking around with smartphones, you're solving a lot of other problems that exist exist in most organizations in terms of how to protect sensitive data, how to allow people on networks appropriately, and how to make sure that people aren't bypassing you. Take a look at what the real problem is and not what the solution is that we think should exist, because today's solutions need to be totally different.
I'd agree with that. Most things in technology, I happen to be, I always say I'm 39, but I have had historical pieces over time that have really kind of emphasized this. It's very seldom is it a revolution, it's an evolution. And I used to be on conferences when we go back and before laptops, and we had a router sit in my shirt pocket in 1991. And we'd go to conferences because it was remote telecommuting, getting down to the, can we do it, should we do it? Pac-Bell had a process out where they were trying to, for taxation reasons and other things, they would have huts to go and drive to. So they were within a 35-mile radius, and it cut down commuting times. So there's various reasons that these things developed. So the idea of mobility and transferability in and outside of your traditional brick and mortar office buildings has been going on. The policies and the pieces have been continuing on. And I think a lot of it's because we're realizing the risk factors that now have that either weren't in control or what could happen or has happened. So we take some of those lessons and move it forward. Again, the whole time is embrace it, because it's not going away. It's going to become more intense, and it's all based on productivity.
I want to hear too from one of the organizations that has to deal with the most difficult side of this problem. Having the type of sensitive data that once it's out there, you can't get back. Any PHI, if people leak your medical records, you can't pull that back. You can't reissue it. It's just gone. And then you've got physicians who are consultants and basically work for a lot of different places, want to do everything. Their time is extremely valuable, and you've got a really hectic situation. How do you deal with that?
So I think that typically that is a great challenge that we face. We are actually looking at products today, like to be able to share that sensitive data. We're actually trialing a share file right now to deal with how we can allow our users to use their own devices, but have that central kind of controlled aspect in place to work with it. And the nice thing about like a share file product is there is an app you can download for that and use that mobilely.
Do you block Dropbox? Do you explicitly disallow? That's kind of
The question is,
Right.
do you specifically disallow Dropbox?
Yeah, so Dropbox, well, we don't have any way to disallow that on the mobile devices today, and that would be a great concern. And I think one of the topics is going to be iOS 7, where we will also discuss some of that. Internally, we do sometimes find Dropbox users by monitoring what we have going on the back end, like their personal drives, and then we reach out to that user. It's very manual. Reach out to that user and then provide them another mechanism to share that data.
Well, this is a good segue, to our next subject of area of users. So when you're communicating to that user, like, hey, we would prefer you to use, our share file instead of Dropbox, how do you make the importance of that clear to your users and to everybody in general? We can put technologies in place to attempt to keep our users in the line, but we also have to communicate to our users the importance of what we're doing. Instead of just saying no, maybe we're approaching a state where it's okay, here's why we're doing this in plain, simple English that everybody in the organization can understand. So how do we approach that? And actually, I'll start with you, Jim, as as you're the EMM customer that's explaining to their end users, this is what we're doing and why we're doing it. And then I want to hear Teresa's response.
I think that it's an internal decision to be offering that service. So that's the first step, is to be able to make that conscious decision there's some benefits both for the organization to make that service readily available. Now, if you elect to keep it in-house or third-party it or cloud-based it, that's another part of the decision process. But if you're going to, in your case, to bring it internally, I think the best thing is, again, endorse it and market it. And allow it, so know that now, in certain ways, you really have some more controls over it. But allow that process of what's driving this human need for it to be encompassed in that organization.
So you said endorse it and market it
Internally.
Yeah. Can you expand on that? You're sitting down with a user. What do you actually tell them?
I would say that we understand your need for doing and using these services. We're offering another service very comparable to it, but it has to have the same elements, ease of use and a variety of those type of things. So it's a matter of awareness as well.
Does that?
We have a question over there.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but how do you regulate that?
You can't.
I mean, it's great to train your user and say, hey, I want you to use this product instead of using Dropbox or whatever. But so what? I don't care. I'm going to still do the way that I want to do it. How do you regulate that? How do you know it? And it's like having the cell phone while you're driving in the phone. If you can't, I mean, you can't.
So what most people do to try to control that is they go out and put blocks on the network for Dropbox and Box and Spider Oak and every other service they can think of. And then there's another service that comes up, and Google Drive's doing their thing and SkyDrive's doing their thing. So they keep playing this endless game of we can stay ahead of this, which you can't because there's new services popping up constantly. But I think the bigger issue and why this is something that IT will have a hard time staying ahead of is with an ideal in large enterprise. So in large enterprise, the biggest problem you have is the machine of change management within the organization. So if you say we want to offer this service for our employees, that they can have this Dropbox, enterprise-style Dropbox, the issue you have is you needed to offer that 4 years ago. And you didn't offer it 4 years ago, you're just now launching it. So you've got a whole pattern of users that have found ways around the fact that you couldn't offer that service. And if you think that Dropbox is the only issue, then it becomes they need some online collaboration tools for working together. And you're like, well, we're gonna have Link in about 6 months for all of our people. And you're like, well, how does that work for external people? Or like, well, we don't have the bridge set up for external users. Okay, thanks, I'll keep using my other solution. So I think the issue is IT cannot possibly respond fast enough for the rate of change of what's happening with IT right now from the outside consumer side. So there's no way you can ever stay ahead of this. The best thing you can do is try to cut out some of your bureaucracy and make it so that you adopt those things quicker, even if it's not the way that you'd like to do things, but have some way of offering it to those people that want it, even if it's not enterprise grade ready within your organization, but have it out there sooner than later.
So as an end user, you're using Dropbox. It's great. It's free, probably expensive with a corporate credit card. How many people have paid for Dropbox with their corporate Amex? I know there's a few other people. Somebody told me yesterday that they did this as well. What's that? Pay for Dropbox with a corporate credit card. The Tech Target actually knows that Brian and Gabe and I do that, by the way, so it's okay. But so as an end user, you say, hey, so somebody comes along and says, we understand your need, but you can have that Dropbox, you can have this product, but by the way, some of the features that you want, you have to wait a couple months for.
It's not comparable service. The things that you want to do with Dropbox are not in the corporate version, which impedes your productivity, which then you just say, forget it, I'm going to do it this other way.
Yeah. Is there any way of even, as anybody from the end user perspective, is there any way that you can effectively be sold on that?
I don't think so.
Yeah,
honestly.
That's a tough one. I think back to our earlier question and point is, so what if we find a user that is using Dropbox? How do we address that? So we previously had some pretty nice structure in place that allowed our users to share their information via our VPN. but that VPN is not available on the phones. Since we're beginning to adopt the BYOD, that's why we need to look at these other products to hopefully wrap some better control over that data sharing. We don't want that information out on a Dropbox.
I would again add, I think the piece I was bringing up and it was eloquently verbalized, is think of it as a marketing opportunity. There's certain periods of time when people will change behavior. So when that technology comes out, be ahead of the curve. And so you find the initial 1 or 2 or whatever the number is in small amounts in your organization, they're using it. Look as an opportunity to see why they're using it and how it may spread itself, as opposed to becoming the Gestapo and say no more.
Yeah, and just real quick with that, a lot of what we've done internally and have talked to other people about is keep it simple. And instead of, from an IT perspective, automatically thinking control, 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 the first thing you should think about is understand, understand, understand. Sit down with your users, know what they're trying to do, know what they're working on, know what their hopes and fears and everything else is, and have that relationship so that you can make the right recommendations. It's funny because most IT departments have done a great job educating their users on all the things they should and should not do with PCs. People know they need to run antivirus. They know they shouldn't click on links from others. We've told them all these things. How many people have actually done that for mobility? I see almost no hands go up in any presentation that I ever give on this. It's because IT is still kind of in denial. When you look at this, getting into the mobile realm is kind of like raising kids. You could sit there with them every single second and try to control absolutely everything they're doing in the hopes that 20 years later they're going to make the right decisions, or you could constantly be reinforcing good habits and give them some responsibilities and help them to understand that it is their responsibility to protect themselves, to protect the company, to protect their customers. And by doing so, you're setting up the right habits for people to do the right things, which they're going to be doing on their own anyway. They're now their own CIO. They're now their own CSO. They have their own devices, their own networks, their own data, their own sharing services. We have to give them the framework to do the right things and develop those habits over time. It's not an easy thing, but it's not a technology solution in all cases either.
So a comment from Brian Katz, and let's move it, and then we'll put a bow on this section.
I think that last comment was closest to where I would take this, but I think you're all missing something. It's great to talk to the users, you need to do it, but you develop a framework with the users. If
Yes.
your users aren't involved and you write the policies and they don't explain to you, I can't have a 15-character password so I can dial my phone, and the security's not in the room and you're not partnering with everybody.
Absolutely.
That's what needs to be built. It's not, how many, you made the comment, you've been telling people to use antivirus and everything else. I'll guess if we would survey this room, we could ask how many people know how to turn off their antivirus, get around the firewall and everything else, because they can't, their computer doesn't work with this stuff on. It becomes a very simple thing that you need to involve your users. That's why I disagree a little bit with Sean. You can get rid of Dropbox if that's what you want to do. The question becomes, work with the users to find 2 or 3 products that are as good or better than Dropbox that you can secure. And when they're involved in that, and they help you choose those, it becomes a much different piece to do that training to market to them and everything else, because they market on themselves.
My statement on Dropbox wasn't that you can't eliminate Dropbox. My point was that there will be services that will crop up that will replace Dropbox. So you can't play the game of we're going to block, we're going to block, we're going to block, we're going to block, because you'll never win that game. You can never stay ahead of the blocking. That was my point on Dropbox.
Okay, so this, this certainly, this users, this consumerization aspect, I'm sure a lot of you remember, Brian and Gabe's series of FUIT articles, and we could certainly spend the whole session talking about this, but I want to shift gears and get a little bit more down into the weeds about enterprise mobility management and some of the specific technologies. So the first thing we have here is what's hot right now is mobile app management, and we talk about managing at a fine grain versus more rough device level management, taking the iPhone and making it into a BlackBerry. And I have, just for a little reference in case any of you aren't as familiar with the concept, but here we're talking, mobile device management. Yes, we can put policies at an entire device level, but then you may be interfering with the user experience, and maybe going down to the more granular level, you have opportunities to leave the user experience for personal applications, leave that unencumbered, while really being able to have good visibility into how the corporate applications interact with each other and interact with the user side. And so, the interesting thing here is, while a year ago, the mobile app management versus mobile device management discussion, it would have been one vendor compared to another. It's interesting now in 2013 that pretty much all of the enterprise mobility management vendors offer a wide range of these types of technologies so that we can dial in on the spectrum where exactly that we need. So I guess first, how does this change how we deal with approaching modern mobile devices? So how do we feel about that large level versus more granular level?
I think it depends on the kind of device and who's using it for what purposes. I mean, there are organizations that are going to purchase corporate devices. They're going to want to have a different level of control of it than if it's a personal device. And I think the classic MDM problem people think of as a complete device control, which it doesn't necessarily have to be. There are selective wipe methods with provisioning profiles. So there are ways to do a little less draconian management of a mobile device. But I think the problem is people have branded MDM as complete device control, which it doesn't necessarily have to be. There are different levels of MDM controls that you can enforce or optionally, disable. So I think most people look at the barrier between MDM or MAM as being strictly dependent upon whether or not you want to enable device level wipe and these kinds of things and turn off cameras and all these kind of things. But it's not, I don't think it's that black and white, to be honest.
And that barrier will be breaking down even more, that we'll see with iOS 7.
Yeah, it really gets down to what people are trying to do and then what's important to the organization in terms of protecting data. For devices that require a PIN for encryption, obviously you need to have a PIN established on the system. And for anybody who's working with sensitive data, they should have their device encrypted, particularly with HIPAA and PCI and other personally identifiable info. So, understanding how people are going to use the device, there's some device level aspects that you do need to configure. And then granularly, you might have the organization say, hey, look, when people walk into the boardroom, you need to hit this NFC tag or have your location services turned on so that we can turn off the camera on your phone. And you agree to that to walk in the boardroom, just like you agree to certain policies when you walk into an airport or other controlled facilities. And when it gets to be more granular like that, you'll see a lot of these widespread, generic, stupid policies get thrown out and things be much more specific to purpose, so that based on who you are, based on where you are, based on what you're trying to do, based on the risk that you're working with, your device is going to do the right things. And it's going to actually help you do the right things. And that's really where mobile device management, mobile app management, and everything else comes together. I personally, too, think it's kind of cool that you've got app-specific VPN technologies so that we don't have to remember to turn on and off VPNs. I remember those bad days, too, Teresa. So now you can just click on an app, and IT defines for that app, here's its connectivity. Here's whether it will accept generic certs or require client certs, and here's how it authenticates. And it all just happens transparently. The user clicks on the app, everything works. That's the way it should be.
So how do we make that clear to the user who's bringing in that device? How do you make me take part in that? If I bring my personal device to work, how do you make me participate?
Yeah, that's really how MDM and enterprise mobility management in general is evolving. It started with the how can we lock down some of the device aspects, and yeah, there's some pieces of that are important. And then it's turned into more, how can we enable people to get to the right apps? So we want them using ShareFile instead of Dropbox or Box instead of all the different choices that you can make there. How can we enable all of those apps and have the right configuration settings on it? So when people go to their app store and say, hey, I want to do file sharing, boom, here's your apps for that. Here's what's approved. You can do whatever you want on the personal side of your phone, and that's totally fine, but within work and within your little bubble that IT controls, here's how we're going to do file sharing. Here's how we're going to do email that might contain medical data. And so it's helping people by pre-configuring the applications and pre-configuring that bubble that represents the work side of their phone and tablet
But there are
environment.
some blurry lines in the MAM solutions, which is one of my levels of frustration. Is you can say, we're going to allow Dropbox as long as it's in our sandbox, because that's what corporate IT approves, it's encrypted, all this kind of great stuff, which you can argue whether or not the sandbox is actually secure, because there have been sandbox breaches on mobile devices, so let's ignore that for a moment. But let's just say the IT procedure and policy is that we're going to support Dropbox as long as it's in our secure sandbox. But I think that's difficult about that is sometimes a lot of these products, when you enable an application in the enterprise app store, you may in turn ultimately disable the personal configuration of that application. So depending on how your policy allows coexistence of those personal and corporate edition of apps, you may impede the person from using both a corporate instance of something and a personal instance. And Dropbox is probably a bad example of that because it's a SaaS-based solution, but there may be certain applications that someone wants to use on a personal level with nothing related to corporate IT data, and if you enable that application and say, once it's enabled in the sandbox, it removes the personal copy, you may inhibit their ability to use it personally, which kind of ruins that.
Yeah, in healthcare, that's especially important because you might have a doctor coming in that's working for 3 or 4 different hospitals and clinics. Each have their own version of Epic or McKesson or Cerner or whatnot. How do you keep all of those separate and isolated? And for the doctor, it's really easy for them to go from hospital A to hospital B to clinic C and know that they're using the right apps. I mean, that's kind of the epitome of this.
Well, one of the challenges I see with that too, when you talk about physicians working for different providers, they may not all have the same back-end system. So as a physician, how do I deal with the potential that one of my healthcare systems uses a different product like AirWatch or Mobile Iron, and then I go to the next site and they're using the Citrix version? So how do you deal with that? Because
Yeah, for MDM, that's a tough problem today.
It doesn't
for mobile
work.
app
I've
management,
tried.
it's a little better, but
Yeah, the idea of 3 individual phones for each different piece is not part of the
No,
part of the
no.
solution.
it's where things like, you mentioned Samsung Knox before, that helps the problem a little bit. But, there's still some development there that's needed.
I
We
think-
need the use cases. As an industry, we need the use cases to make sure that we're hitting, where everybody's going with the use of the technologies.
I think there'll be a trend where systems will be in place, and I see it coming fairly soon, where the profiles of an individual is not based on the device itself, but it's based on the naming convention, who you are, your role, and your affiliations with cross-affiliations, like you said, with multiple hospitals. And there'll be enough intelligence in there so that they can identify in some form or fashion, whether it's time of day, whether it's location, whether it's combination of these things, so that they can align the app so that you are who you are, doing what you're supposed to do, and this is the product and the apps that you get at that point in time. The systems are, we're close to doing it. There's a lot of pieces that haven't come together, but I think that might end up being one of the end games of it.
Yeah, just real quick to add to that, that's one of the things that I'm helping to drive forward is when you're making access decisions, it's not just your login or your device, it's the 5 W's of access. Who, what, when, where, and why. If you can make access decisions based on all 5 of those, you've got an incredible level of control.
Okay, so moving on to our next area. So iOS 7, and this is a good extension of the device level and the more granular app level discussion. iOS 7. For those of us that haven't been messing around with the developer release or haven't been leaking the developer versions onto blogs and stuff. It's still, it's going to be big. And, if we look at the history of what iOS has done, the original iPhone, we had nothing there in place, essentially. iPhone OS 2 in 2008, we had the first configuration profiles and Exchange support, and we had that big leap. And then in 2010, we could manage the configuration profiles over the air, and essentially modern MDM was born. And then subsequently, we had the ability to install corporate managed applications over the air. But now that we have this visibility into this granular visibility into managed apps, or at least according to Apple's scant public information, that they're hinting about this managed open-in per app VPN. Man, how does that change things for the industry? Like, what happens? How do EMM vendors change their approach? What happens to third-party mobile app management vendors? How do you guys see this shaking things up?
I think one of the things that's going to happen is you're going to start to see a lot less differentiation between the product development cycles, because right now the real IP that differentiates MDM or MAM vendor is how much time they spent sort of developing their own solution around the weaknesses within iOS for enterprise app management. Now, when those APIs are available to everybody, you're going to see, I think, two things happen. One, some of the smaller players will sort of disappear because they're not providing enough value add. The bigger players will receive much more benefit out of the box on iOS 7. There'll be less work for them to do, so they're going to have to start trying to find ways of differentiating or adding value on top of a core set of APIs that are already there, provided for them out of the box. But I think the big problem is if you focus on how things are different from the iOS versus Android platform, the one thing iOS has going for it, to be honest, is the fact that every time a new release comes out and becomes public, for the better part of all the devices, inside of like a year, 80% or 90% of the devices are on that latest OS, assuming that Apple doesn't restrict it to these devices fall off. So the good thing that the MAM and MDM vendors have in their benefit in the iOS side is the fact that they know that in a short order of time, everyone will be on the latest OS, so they don't have to worry about providing the legacy support as much as you would on an Android platform. So I think it's going to make a lot less differentiation between the providers in the end.
Yep, well said. Apple's releveling the playing field and putting in a lot of capabilities that people have had to work around for years. I think it's definitely welcomed, and I think it'll help all of us better fine-tune our security and risk profiles.
And so some of the mobile app management capabilities are maybe enabled at the platform level. So what third-party mobile app management does, it maybe moves downstream a little bit in some cases?
Yeah, it can very much do that. I mean, to me, the interesting thing is going to be how do we differentiate between personal use of the phone and work use of the phone, and be able to build in the right level of management so that you can manage your personal phone as yours and maintain a good level of isolation between your personal data and apps and work data and apps. And being able to run email in a container and enterprise applications in a container and be able to set specific VPN features for those definitely moves us forward quite a bit.
I think there will probably be a lot of things happening as well. I talked about the differentiation that the providers will have to start doing. Is once there is a base set of SDK available to everyone, and everyone has that same basic application management features, you're going to have to start to see people differentiating in ways that they hadn't thought about doing before. So we talked a little bit earlier, nobody said the word contextual usage, but I think you're going to start to see more and more people think about how contextual usage changes what gets exposed or hidden on a device. And one of the things that it's been theorized that Apple may be adding into the next iPhone is the Authentic fingerprint scanner, which could potentially open up yet another set of value adds that you would do, where if you say, this is sensitive data, I want to make absolutely certain that the person holding the phone is this person, maybe somebody gives their wife or kid or whatever the PIN for their mobile device so they can play Angry Birds, but when the sensitive data needs to be exposed, we're going to do a biometric scan of the fingerprint to make absolutely certain this is the person that we want to expose this data to. So I think there's a lot of different ways you can differentiate and add value on top of the core application management, and I think that's what you're going to see a lot of these providers do as time goes on.
Yeah, it's a good example of transactional authentication. Yeah. Good question?
Do you guys think that Apple will go as far as providing enterprise-level management features, not only an API?
They're doing that today. So Apple has enterprise management today.
So where are the other vendors fall into that though? So So if Apple is providing an enterprise level management pack for everybody, what is the value of the other vendors?
As I said, some of the other vendors are providing a lot deeper control of the device than what Apple provides out of the box. Some people don't trust Apple's management solution, so they want to have a third-party vendor that is providing additional value beyond what Apple does. So I think it all kind of depends on what an organization's adoption is, but there are organizations out there that are fully using just Apple's management solution and not using third-party. So it
Yeah,
does
and then
exist.
you gotta think about integration with your directories, your authentication systems, support for other devices that are non-Apple. There's a lot of other reasons to have additional functionality, but yeah, what Apple's got in place is definitely escalating and looks pretty good for a smaller business.
The Apple solution will not manage an Android device, probably ever. So there's a good reason. There's a question here.
This is the iOS section, obviously.
Yeah.
The question is, there's a lot more
Yes.
to MDM than iOS.
Correct.
Besides Windows Phone, I got Linux boxes, I got iMacs, and none of these things are under control. So, are they patched? My Mac doesn't pick up on whether they're patched or not.
What is interesting, honestly, that I've seen in the last probably 12 months is how much Microsoft is engaging alternate platform management with SCCM and Intune. I got to say that was a real shocker for me because Microsoft has traditionally with SCCM really focused on Windows OS management, and they really never really extended that to Mac and Linux to a great degree. But in the last release of SCCM combined with Intune, they're really starting to branch out and doing Linux machine software inventory, package distribution, managing Macs, managing iOS, Android devices. I mean, to me, that's a whole new Microsoft. They were never in that position up until the last 12 months. So,
There's a question from Simon. I mean, if you're so that that's a good point, and I think we'll get that. I'm sorry.
Could you restate the question, please?
Oh. So yeah. So that will be addressed in a second when we get to dual persona. So we can go ahead and ask that now. So yeah, so much of what we care about, the feature in iOS 7 that we're excited about is that we can prevent that document open-in from our corporate share file into the user's consumer Dropbox and so why do we care about that? I guess one answer is compliance, but
I don't think Simon was here when we opened the original thing and the EMM question came up, and I had said from my perspective EMM is IT's reaction, a knee-jerk reaction to the classical sense that we have to control all data and all systems and all that kind of stuff, and the reality is you never will be able to control it. But the reason why we're all here is because IT believes they can control it and they can enforce policy and they can do all this stuff. They believe they can do DLP and analyze traffic going in and out of the firewall, and it just simply is not possible. You can make some low-hanging fruit, you can catch certain things, you will never catch everything. And that's the problem. But we're here because of the fact that IT says we have to control it.
Well, but we have to lead. That is, this community, of all communities, has the ability to lead the direction for IT, right? So one thing I hate is that vendors sell to a legacy IT work practice,
Yeah.
right? And not lead.
I think the biggest issue, to be honest, that all of us have to fix, and the industry as a whole, is the fact that we have absolutely no way of applying any form of metadata or contextual usage of data. Just because I work in a hospital or just because I work at a financial institution does not mean that the data that I'm dealing with is in any way sensitive. And that's the biggest problem. And if you say, Sean, you can't have your email, you can't have your documents on your personal device, I would question why. Because nothing that I may ever have in my email would in any way ever expose a bank or a hospital to any form of liability. Is there a possibility there could be some sensitive data? Sure, it's possible someone could send me an email improperly and I'm not the intended recipient. But something that's in my email as an IT person, potentially would not be trade secret info, would not pose any financial risk to the organization. So why is it that we treat every single piece of information in a company as being equal and when it's not? That's the bigger problem.
Yeah, it definitely is. And what if we took a look at the solution a little differently and say, instead of all this IT control, we realize that there's multiple administrators. You've got IT, you've got the business, you've got the end user who bought the device. Everybody's got to come together and be able to do things that make sense. So what if instead of, you being locked down on email, great, have your personal email, have your company email, be able to get into it. Not a problem whatsoever. But if you are sent something sensitive, there's a way for the email system or something back in the chain to say, hey, wait a second, this is special. In order for you to open this up, you need to do something extra. Whether it's go into a different application or re-authenticate or something, this is a way that you can see this email, be able to react to it, but not have it be on the device and exposed, unencrypted, all the things that we know are bad. So we got to think of usage patterns that kind of make sense instead of trying to apply some of the old technologies that really don't work in the mobile world.
Yeah.
I would offer something that I think, I don't mean to step the boundaries a bit, but I think there's another generation coming forward, and it's really about intelligence in real time. And so that comment is encompassing because what's driving it is change factors that happen very fast. In the case of the world of security, it's mutation. So the question is, from a security standpoint, can you identify, everything's been known as a point system, and things get through. They get through because it's mutated, it's changed, something's happened. And it's done pretty closely. It used to be, months, now it's down to hours sometimes, those type of attacks. So as the world of intelligence evolves, and that's getting into big data, that's getting into almost artificial intelligence to the point, and there's a long transition here. But I think that's going to be part of it, all of at least a step towards answering some of these and solving some of these problems.
So I want to take a minute, and we have about 20 minutes left and about 6 more topics to cover. Sort of mention some of the, this is a great conversation, and I do want to though hit on some of the issues that the products in the enterprise mobility management are addressing today, and maybe doing so imperfectly, but this is the shape of what people are in fact talking about. And today, right now, with technologies that we have available to us, one of our biggest sticking points is right now. All philosophical conversations about how we should be having contextual awareness of data aside, right now, today, we have, these few ways, if we're making the assumption that we do want to protect the data in these ways, we have these few ways of, protecting email. And, it comes down to email is one of our most difficult things for EMM to address because frankly, because of what Apple does to us, and because we want a full push email experience. And so if we, for now, taking that assumption, that we do want to provide that separation or protection, opinions about whether or not it's the right way to be doing it aside, we have our options of using a native built-in email client on the device, but then we might have to restrict the device some more. We have, this technique of proxying and encrypting attachments before they're delivered to the device so that you at least protect attachments so that they can only be opened in corporate documents or in corporate deployed applications. Another version of this seems to be coming with iOS 7 with this managed open-in. Or third-party email apps. This is what we have today, and with the given assumptions that these are based on. So I want to so these issues. So let's discuss.
So number 2 is stupid. Let's just get that one right out. Or 2A. That's just dumb. I'm sorry. There's absolutely no reason to do that because it makes the assumption that all critical, important data is in an attachment, which is just stupid. So 2A is just dumb. Could we just take that one out? We won't even talk about it.
Next topic.
Let's just make 2B only. Yes. Thank you, Jack. Cool.
There's one other option that's not on there, and I'd be remiss in not at least mentioning it, and that's virtualization. We see, oftentimes I'll get an email and it says, this is digitally signed, and I'll pull it up on my device, and I just see who I got it from, says it's digitally signed, and I kick into Receiver and go on to Real Outlook and take a look at the email.
Yeah,
and
I love when I
can
get emails
respond
from
to it.
Microsoft with their IRM protection, and I can't read it on anything other than Outlook. That's brilliant.
That sounds fun.
If they're occasional and it's something that really is sensitive, it's not a bad solution. If it's something that you had to do every time you got an email, yeah, I think most people wouldn't deal with that.
Unfortunately, some people don't always have the IRM stuff checked when it should be checked, and so you get emails that are just like, 6 words, nothing that needed to be protected, whatever, but they,
Yep.
IRM's enabled automatically, so it's frustrating.
So what about, we have many people that are also proponents of, third-party mail applications to be able to provide the degree of control that you want. And, right now, third-party email applications on iOS are no fun because you don't get full push downloading, but that could be changing with iOS 7. Does that change the story around third-party apps, maybe?
I don't think so. Because to be honest, no matter how well you craft your third-party email application, the productivity gains people get by using their own personal device oftentimes has to do with the UX and how they interact with the application. And when you have these things that are slightly different versus native, it just frustrates the users. It's not to say they won't use it if they have to, but it's still not what they want.
So what about, because I don't believe that third-party email clients are inherently bad. I mean, look at how people.
Have you used good?
I said inherently bad,
okay.
not in reality. I mean, look, people love email clients more than anything else. I think people love the flavor of the week. Look at Mailbox. Or if somebody wants to swipe this way to delete an email, and somebody else wants to shake their phone to delete an email, I personally use the Gmail app for Gmail. There's a lot of great things that you could theoretically do with a third-party app.
I don't disagree with that. It's all an issue of, does a person have the choice to choose their third-party mail app, or are you enforcing the choice upon them?
No, I think
That's
that choice
the
is key.
Right.
Because each one of these options right here, right now, represents some sort of compromise, and yeah, that's just unfortunate. And but how about this idea? If our EMM solution, we can deploy a couple of those options. Hey, why not let the user pick and maybe default to the one that impacts the user's personal stuff the least, but if they want to go some other route, then they can pick?
What's your direction there, Teresa?
I was just going to say, I think some of this actually goes back to the comment made earlier about working with your users to see what best suits them. And maybe it isn't one size fits all here. Maybe it is a combination of a couple options for them. So.
And this is where I'm going to skip ahead a few slides. So we've been talking.
All of this stuff falling in the category of the user is the enemy. And don't we know that all that stuff always fails?
I think this is falling exactly in the opposite category. If we give, again, I'm not here to argue about the assumption that we need to be providing this type of protection, but I'm saying if we, if we're doing that by providing the user choice, or if you can say, hey, you can pick,
I'm good with that. I'm interested in the fundamental assumption.
I'm sorry?
I'm interested in the fundamental assumption, which is
Yeah. Well, there are a wide variety of topic areas that I wanted to get to this discussion, and we had that section already, and we can certainly discuss that more.
I fully agree with you then that this is the flip side, that's a good thing.
So that was the email discussion.
Skip right over dual persona.
Well, we can I think we've been addressing that continually. But again, talking about what the enterprise mobility management industry is doing today. We spend a lot of time talking about email, and we spend a lot of time talking about Dropbox and share file and file syncing. But isn't the exciting stuff, beyond that? And what are, we're so much in that core space. What are we doing beyond that? What are we seeing, or what are you seeing people do? Sean and Kurt, and what do we want to be doing?
I would ask one question, actually two questions with this. First of all, what would your users want to do with Google Glass? And second of all, what would your EMM policy be for Google Glass? Think about stuff like that, and you're moving in the right direction.
So I think to address the question you said about what would enterprises want to do versus what would the user want to do, I think the big problem is enterprises adopted the notion of needing to do enterprise app store and mobile application management because of the fact that the app store model was so successful. And because the average consumer has 100 apps on their device, and so the enterprise folks thought, we have to be in that space as well, we have to do something to do this. And oftentimes it was around delivery of a couple of core things, files, email, maybe access to SharePoint, some very, very simple things. And beyond that, it was sort of well, what do we do next? What's the next thing that we do? And of course, within an organization, the enterprise architecture team always says, well, we're going to have to deliver some set of applications that are internally developed systems that we're going to expose to a mobile device in a different form. And maybe that different form is they're going to use a classic web application. Maybe they look at their classic web applications and realize that, yeah, this classic web app is fine to do an application level VPN, but the problem is it doesn't really run in Safari or in WebKit, so we got to find some other way to serve this up. But I think people that are looking at doing enterprise app stores are just trying to figure out what goes beyond email. Like, what are we going to develop to support the mobile platform, and how are we going to do it to support it on a Windows endpoint and an iOS endpoint and an Android endpoint? Because unfortunately, the choice of development language you choose sort of dictates your platform, unless you're going to do a development framework that becomes more general. So I think enterprises are still trying to figure this out. They have a handful of applications they want to deliver to mobile devices, and one of the sad realities is one of the apps they want to deliver, of course, is if they're rolling Link out, they want to deliver the Link app. But that starts to pose a problem, because how do you deliver a wrapped Microsoft Link application? You kind of can't.
Yeah, that's the app ecosystem question. And since this is a Citrix session, I have the Works the Works app partner store example. And as we have 6 or 8 different vendors developing their third-party mobile app management protocols. And right now iOS 7 may take care of some of the basic low-level intra-app connectivity. So that takes some of the pressure off, I believe, of some of the the compatibility issues from one MAM vendor to another. But still we saw this. So we have several different competing ecosystems for mobile application management, and each one trying to build up their catalog of partner applications.
Yeah, and that's sort of a losing battle in my mind from a long term. You can't have every single vendor out there having their own SDK and anticipate that every single developer of a third-party application is going to partner with every one of these SDKs and compile their application, because at the end of the day, they're going to have to support it when they're compiled with those SDKs or with those specific APIs. So it's a losing battle, and perhaps iOS 7 will change things a bit to where we won't have 4 different mobile SDKs. We're going to have, everyone has the basic fundamental one, and there might be a little bit of a feature above and beyond that you might want to align with a certain vendor. But hopefully that will change.
Yeah, and with any app store, you really need to step back and take a look at it and say, how is this making our users more productive, and how is it making them more empowered? How is it making sure that they can do better things faster and be able to do the right things? So how do they search for the apps to know what they should use for putting in their expense reports and doing file sharing and things like that? I think there's another round of app store thought process that really needs to get people into the app store to find the right things, instead of it's corporate shoving down the apps that we want you to use. We really need to think more in terms of empowerment.
Well, so that's an interesting point, Brian. You mentioned mobile information management, which is something that I wanted to talk about because so we talk about this idea of mobile information management, where no matter the app, as the data travels from one app to another, that we can trust the application to respect the policies, but of course that also requires an ecosystem of applications that has the ability and that we can trust to respect those policies. And I think that means that we need to have some sort of, these apps need to be built to respect the data in the same way. So that means an SDK or an ecosystem, and in my mind, that's mobile app management ecosystems all over again.
Well, I think even before you worry about the application supporting it, someone has to agree upon an IRM standard, and there are no IRM standards. So until you have some kind of IRM standard, you can't possibly have SDKs that adhere to a standard, because there aren't any. Everyone has their own standard on how you assign trust and rights to data. And if there aren't standards, then that's not going to happen. So that's a long ways off.
Yeah.
And also multidimensional.
Well, any hopes for any standards? The last 2 or 3 years, has been a really interesting time, for iOS and Android management in particular. iOS 7 is coming out in a couple of weeks, and that's going to be some big changes. How do we each see that this is going to fill out? What's the next year going to be like?
Go ahead.
From my perspective, I think we're going to see continued evolution and being able to take advantage of platform features in iOS 7 and others, as we've talked about, that'll level the playing field a little bit. We still need to get control across all the devices people are using. So, if I've got a MacBook and a Samsung Galaxy S4 and an iPad, how do I make sure that I've got consistency of policies and data protection across all of those? That's really what we need to be looking at. Also, from information rights management and data-centric approach, what if your medical record was emailed to everybody in this room and you didn't have to worry about it because you knew it would be protected and only could be opened by people who are authorized? That would be kind of cool too, right? Yeah, and then a couple of years later, somebody figures out how to hack it. So, we always have to try to stay a step ahead of the problem, but the problem keeps evolving too.
To that point, a medical record being emailed, we have policy, not anything that can restrict it from happening, but we do have policies that people are supposed to adhere to where they shouldn't be doing stuff like that. I think there would be severe repercussions to that individual if they had done that.
Is there a better opportunity for automating that?
Maybe. Yeah, I think maybe that as we look at the mobile device management aspect and controlling email, maybe we could.
There was some number of years ago, I was giving a presentation at Microsoft, and this is long before the HIPAA law came into effect. But I had somebody who, we were talking about email spam and mail security and all these kinds of things. And somebody who was from a local hospital of some sort said, well, when we have to send important data out, we just make sure that we password protect the zip file so that nobody can retrieve the contents. And I sat there for a few seconds and I was like, you do realize that even myself, and I'm not a elite hacker by any stretch, but I can crack your zip password in a matter of seconds. Like seriously, that's not a protection mechanism. But to get back on topic with what Jack was asking, I think from my perspective, we talk about the future, and even if we're focusing on a near-term goal of 1 to 3 years, I think we're focusing a lot on mobility and talking about tablets and smartphones and that kind of stuff, but I think there's a much bigger emerging trend that's happening, which is the Internet of Things, and it's happening very, very quickly. And I think everyone's focused on what happens with, applications and data on mobile devices, but there's a whole separate exchange of personal information and data leaking across multiple devices in our homes and things that we're wearing and that kind of stuff. And that, to me, is the much bigger problem we have to face, not worrying about a couple of mobile phones, but worrying about every single device in our home or in our workplace, potentially exchanging information with devices that we have on us. That's the bigger issue.
Yeah, those sensors can give away a lot more than you intend. And they can tell whether people are lying, whether they're uncomfortable in a certain situation, whether somebody's sick, there's all kinds of data that you can infer from those sensors, and that's going to be a really big issue.
All right, we have about we have 1 minute left, so 30 seconds. Sorry, your last comments.
Okay, the future, we should all embrace it. It's exciting because the processing power that we have in our hands is far greater and is going to allow a lot more granularity in a number of different ways in real time that we never envisioned. I think we had a wake-up call, and security probably did that, is the fact that there are vulnerabilities, there are issues out there we didn't even think about. I can tell you that we have now, to the point where we're taking a look at an X-ray or MRI CAT scans, we're detecting the grayscale and et cetera, and see if there's been any hidden fields and any insertions in that. Or a pacemaker that's had a particular piece that's sitting in there, and the communication back, is that secure or not? So this whole idea of being able to find the vulnerabilities and holes that we never ever anticipated, now it's a wake-up call so that we can think ahead of the curve as opposed to 3 years behind the curve.
All right, well, thank you to Citrix for letting us have this discussion. Thank you for our panelists for participating, and thank you all for coming.